Yes, as much as I deeply care about the issue of daycare, and I talk about it a second, I guess I have to disagree with people up here. Um, I think providing adequate and affordable daycare is a fundamental thing that we need to try and accomplish in our society. My own child has been involved in daycare since he was, I guess virtually 2 or 3 months old. But, you know, we've just spent an hour and a half talking about all the bad effects of budget deficits and the like, and I think it's awful hard to look into the face of a $13 billion federal program to basically subsidize this when we haven't even begun to go down the road as far as we can of encouraging employers to provide this. And similar kinds of incentives, changing the rules that make it easier in some ways for individuals to provide it in their homes. And I'd have to take an awful close look at a bill like that. I'm not favorably disposed toward it.
Okay, let's get a question from the Women's Political Caucus. Is Bonnie Wells?
Yes. Well, since we're talking, I'm also for the family, Teddy, for the family. I'd like to ask Jane Eskind, if I might. Tennessee recently enacted moderate legislation providing mandatory leave for new mothers in companies employing 100 or over at a site. Would you support such legislation nationally, or would you support stronger legislation which applies to all workers?
As a bit of background, let me say that I'm aware of the parental leave bill that you referred to, and I also know that there were lots of compromises before that bill finally got passed. One of the things that I think we have to guard against as a country and as governmental people who make policy and set policy for everybody is that when we do this, that the policy we establish not be a penalty for some area, that what is a boon to one is not a bust to another. On the Public Service Commission, I think I was able to balance the consumer with the needs of the utilities and to do so in a fairly good way. I support mandatory leave. I support parental leave. I support the concept of it. I just want to make sure that when we enact it, that we do not drive a small businessman out of business because he simply can't afford he doesn't have the personnel, he can't afford to offer that to his employees.
Okay, Ms. Wells, did you want that question answered by anybody else? All the panel? Okay. Mr. Searcy?
Yes. General support of any parental leave bill, particularly those that have been crafted in recent months that are gender neutral. There had been some problems earlier with that. I'm glad to see those have been resolved. I heard one of my opponents say earlier how this impacts on women. Fortunately, it impacts on men as well in terms of their ability to take leave. I'm not as familiar with the state parental leave bill as I'd like to be, although if it exempts all employers below 100 employees, I don't think there's enough teeth in that measure. And if we're talking about federal legislation in that regard, then I would certainly like it to be tailored to an exemption that's much lower than that. The small business person that we must be concerned about is really the person that employs 20 people or less. It's those enterprises that provide 60% of our gross national product, and we dare not tamper with their stability in any knee-jerk, ad hoc kind of fashion.
Okay. Mr. Clement?
Teddy, I support the parental leave bill. This particular bill that passed the House and Labor Committee, it's for employers 50 and more employees, as I understand it. Just as Jane said, it was a compromise bill. Some wanted much more than the 10 weeks unpaid leave. They wanted as much as 18 weeks unpaid leave, and they finally compromised on the 10 weeks unpaid leave. I think it's a good bill, and my goodness, look at all the broken homes that we've had in years. And I know Phil talking about the cost of it. My goodness, there's no telling the cost. We couldn't quantify the cost of what's happened in the years past because of the broken homes and the split-up homes that we've had. And we need to do something to keep the family together.
Okay, Mr. Bredesen?
I think some basic protection for women in particular, when a when a child is born or when a baby is adopted is in order and is appropriate. I think the bill before Congress right now, the one that's been reported out of Labor and Education, is, I think, just excessive in that area. I mean, 10 weeks over a period of 24 months for those things. I believe it also deals in the same way with leave for ill parents. And I just think it's going to put much too great a strain on employers at those kinds of levels. Some basic bill which guarantees a woman the right to have some time off at the time of birth of a baby and to return to a job, I think makes a great deal of sense, and I'd support it. This bill's excessive.
All right, we have a representative from the Farm Bureau here to ask a question. You, Mr. Rodero?
Yes, sir. All right. Teddy, I'd like to address this to all the candidates, and this is about the National Freeze and Fix budget. Approximately 2 weeks ago, Farm Bureau proposed an 8-point program to the Budget Summit members that centered around a freeze of government spending in total and a commission to come up with a new budget process. The freeze would stay in place until a new budget process is instituted. And a one-year budget freeze would save about $30 billion in fiscal year 1988. And the second year of 1989 would save another $60 billion for a total two-year saving of about $90 billion. Now, this could be done without cutting payment to any one group. And would you support these recommendations and initiate it now? Just start, Mr. Clemens, please.
All right, fine.
Well, I think that's one option and another tool available to us, because we're going to have to move in the direction of balancing the budget. And President and Congress are now moving toward cutting $75 billion in the next 2 years. I've already come out, which you might know, with a new proposal on a 2-year budget cycle rather than a 1-year budget cycle. When the new fiscal year just started, fiscal year 88 and 1st of October, you got 13 appropriation bills. Not one of them had been approved by Congress yet. Just another example, we spend all of our time each year looking at new budgets and not establishing priorities in order to balance the budget. We must move in that direction, so it has some consideration that we'll have to look at very seriously.
All right, Mr. Bredesen.
I'm not very enthusiastic about that, sir. I guess I have a basic philosophy that if you pay someone to go to Congress, one of the things you're paying them for, just as you do a manager in a business, is to exercise some discretion, to make some choices among competing programs for money. And any approach to solving the budget deficit, which simply involves cutting everything in a level sense across off, I think is abdicating that responsibility that Congress has and that they're being paid for. I would much prefer to put Congress's feet to the fire with some hard targets to make those hard choices. That's what I think leadership is about, and it's what I sure hope to be able to bring to the Congress.
Ms. Eskind.
I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the proposal, but I feel that it's like the Graham-Rudman bill that passed, that, you know, any automatic freeze, any automatic cut is an abdication of responsibility, and I'm glad, you know, it falls in line with my feeling about the line item veto, which I also think is an abdication of responsibility, and I'm very much opposed to that, and very much opposed to Congress in any way abdicating its duties.
Mr. Searcy.
I don't necessarily think that our consideration of the freeze-fix proposals, as they're so-called, is an abdication of the responsibility of anybody. As a matter of fact, I think to the contrary, it's our responsibility to look at them and see if they make sense. I'm not so certain, though, that the numbers that I've seen coming from those proposals are as on target and are as reliable as they're projected. I'd like to take a look at them and see. I'm not foreclosed to any route at this point. And for that reason, you know, I'd like to talk with anybody in more detail about what the comprehensive implications of those measures are.
Let me ask a quick question to you. people in Davidson County, as you all know, have to have their cars tested for pollution. The Environmental Protection Agency insists. So should that continue? If you're elected to Congress, would you do anything to continue it, to stop it? How do you all feel about that? Let's begin with Mr. Bredesen.
I think the system as currently put together is wrong-headed and should not continue. If it were possible to extend the requirements for that to surrounding counties, to make it a little more meaningful, it's something I'd consider. I think that the real changes in the air quality in Nashville are going to come from the fundamental technological changes that are taking place in the automotive industry, and that's the primary thing that we should focus on. If someone could show me that doing it in a way that was fair to everyone would substantially enhance the air quality, however, I'd be for continuing it as long as it's handled fairly by having people from surrounding counties subject
Would you try
as well.
to stop it?
Would I try to stop it?
Yes. Would you introduce a bill or do it?
Under the current system
Yes,
applying
sir.
to Davidson County, yes.
Ms. Eskind, how do you feel about the MARTA kind of inspection?
Oh, I disagree with Phil. I think that the inspections are valid. I think they're appropriate, and I think they ought to be continued. I think the vast majority of cars are cars within Davidson County. They're doing the pollution. I not only support the MARTA program, I support continued funding for the Clean Air Act.
Mr. Searcy, how do you feel about that?
Yes, I think our focal point must begin on not what burdens MARTA or any other testing program imposes upon us as citizens, but what happens as we get choked, literally. Our air becomes scarcer and scarcer and scarcer as we continue to try to go about our routines. I think that's the focal point. The query then is MARTA doing a good job at that? And there's some pro and con on that, and that needs to be evaluated further, but that needs to be the evaluation. Once we've made the evaluation, we don't simply pull the plug on MARTA. We either make it better and effective, or we continue it.
But the concept of testing cars you agree with?
Yeah, I don't have any problems with that.
Okay.
Clean air, clean water, we must move in that direction. We don't hear as much talk about that now as we used to. There are 230,000 cars per day that come into Davidson County from other counties. You got another 225,000 cars that are moving around Davidson County. Just Davidson County being involved won't work. Everyone else has to be involved in the process as well. I'm very interested in mass transit. It's really affecting the quality of our life when we talk about traffic congestion here in Nashville now. I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime, and I'm sure many of you others feel as well. So I'd like to tie the mass transit with a positive, progressive program for clean air, and I think it would work.
Okay, I'm just a little confused. Do you favor the current program or not?
Oh, yes, we've got to have the current program,
All right.
in effect, yes.
Thank you. Representative from NOW.
Hello, I'm Holly Spann, the president of the Nashville chapter of NOW, and our question is to each of you. And do you support the Civil Rights Restoration Act, and what is your position on amendments to the Civil Rights Restoration Act?
Let's begin with Mr. Bredesen.
Basically, yes. You'll have to help me with which amendments you're thinking specifically of.
Title IX, women in education, handicap rights, age discrimination, the Act of 1964. It was drafted in response to Grove City versus Bell, Supreme Court decision which gutted Title IX.
Okay. My basic answer is yes. I'd like the opportunity to review the specific amendments that you've laid out before trying to take some hard position on it. I believe strongly in the notion of using the legal system to ensure that people throughout our society, women, handicapped persons, other groups that you have mentioned here, are entitled to full and equal participation in our society and in the benefits of our society, and you certainly can count on me as a friend in that regard in the Congress.
Let me answer your question specifically. I think the Grove City decision was wrong. I think it was It would set back civil rights in this country by decades, if not centuries. I oppose it. I have said publicly I'm opposed to it, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that there is no legislation which comes into the Congress that gets out of the Congress that supports that decision, which was mean-spirited and counterproductive to everything we believe in.
What did the Grove City decision do?
What it essentially did was say that the law used to say that if a school discriminated, it was not, could not get federal money. Now the Grove City decision says if a department in a school discriminates, that department cannot get federal money, but the rest of the school can. And I think it allows for discrimination in the biology department, but not in another department where federal funding might come in. And I think it's absolutely outrageous to say that a little discrimination is fine.
All right, Mr. Searcy.
As a general proposition, I support the passage of the Civil Rights Restoration Act. More particularly regarding Title IX funds, one of the tremendous benefits of Title IX programs has been delivering parity in athletic programs, in academia. I mean, that's been a very important development, so that we now see top quality women's basketball, for example, and volleyball and other sports that heretofore did not make it because they weren't the big ticket items in a university. And I see that as all as part of the necessary development, the cultural development, the ancillary development to the academic program, so necessary for all of our youth, men and women, so that the gutting of Title IX as a practical matter destroys that. And I'm opposed to that, and that's why this is called a Restoration Act, and that's why I'm supporting it.
Okay, Mr. Clement?
I'll agree with Walter. You know, that's a rather general statement, but the Civil Rights Restoration Act, there are many good parts about it.
All right, a question here from Mike Wood. Mike, would you stand up, please, with the Donaldson Hermitage Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, my question is addressed to Mr. Bredesen, please. I'm a businessman in the Donaldson Hermitage area, but my business covers all of Davidson and Robertson County. It's in the healthcare business. And a problem I see on a daily basis is the elderly, care for the elderly. We find ourselves having the elderly that are too wealthy to be able to purchase care or have care for themselves, or too poor to have care. They do not fall within the guidelines of the Medicare and Medicaid. As a healthcare executive reputation, what would you suggest, Mr. Bredesen and others, to help our citizens with this problem?
I think it hasn't become a full-blown issue yet, but the subject of Medicare, the spiraling cost of health care, and the difficulties in gaining access to that health care for elderly people is going to be a major agenda item over the next 10 years. I think there are some specific things that can be done, and one of them is to remove the bias towards institutional care, which is built into Medicare. In my own business, we found that there were many more effective ways to provide health care than simply putting someone in the hospital. Home health care, for example, being a very effective one, and lower levels like nursing homes and rehabilitation facilities, much less expensive, better care. And I think someone coming to the Congress with some expertise in this area can at least help direct activity toward areas which are less expensive and which are better care. It's not too often we have a chance to do both of those things together, but it's something I believe I can contribute.
All right, Ms. Eskind?
Well, I would disagree. I would think it has become a full-blown problem. I think the federal government is proposing that one of the ways we balance the budget is by reducing Medicare benefits, and I am violently opposed to that. I think we don't need to balance the budget on the backs of the elderly. I think there are also areas where we can provide some innovative thinking in terms of catastrophic health care insurance. I think that's important, and it's one of the moral imperatives of the next congressional session. And the other thing I think we need to look at is just the statistic that you brought. How many people are simply not covered by any kind of insurance who fall through the cracks and are faced with outrageous health care bills? And I think we need to be creative and responsible in addressing those.
Okay, Ms. Searcy.
Yes. This is a two-headed problem, and it's not only the Medicare side, but it's also the Medicaid side, or at least what both were designed to do. Medicare being designed to help our elderly get through rough spots in the health care access potpourri. Medicare, on the other hand, or Medicaid, on the other hand, taking care of our poor and disadvantaged. Neither one of them are doing the job, quite clearly. One of the problems is that, again, in our ad hoc, knee-jerk budgetary process, what we've done is actually taken funds from the Medicaid side to shore up Social Security, when instead what we should have been trying to do is look at the budget process comprehensively and then make the decisions based upon a broad overview, as you would in your commercial business. Now, as a person who represents home health agency clients, who represents nursing homes, I'm fundamentally aware of what the problems are. I'm also, as treasurer of senior citizens, fundamentally aware of what happens when you have to sell your home place simply to qualify for Medicare. We need to stop that.
All right, Mr. Clement.
Well, this is going to be with us, in my opinion, the next 10 years. When we refer to health care cost, as well as the quality of health care, and as well as the catastrophic care proposals that are pending in conference now. We've seen a 38% increase in Medicare premiums just this year. And I know a lot of the elderly and senior citizens I've talked to are very concerned about that, because many of them only have one check, and that's that Social Security check between them and having nothing. And we're really going to have to focus some real attention there. And I really, and you got a group of great concern that we have too, that are not getting the attention or the proper respect, and we'll look into that as well.
Okay, this is Wendy Love from the organization MANA.
Is, other than increasing the minimum wage, which you've already addressed, what social programs would you like to see improved? What initiatives would you propose to improve the lives of poor families? And in light of the federal budget deficit, how would you fund any additional spending that you propose?
All right, who would you like to begin with? Let's begin with Mr. Bredesen.
Of course.
Huh? No.
Let's begin with me.
Well, let's begin with Mr. Bredesen. All right.
How many times All right, I just want to know, Danny.
All right.
I would gladly give it to Mr. Searcy if he prefers.
All right.
Well, I think the ultimate social program of all, quite honestly, I think if we talk about catastrophic health insurance, if we talk about minimum wage, if we talk about this or that, whatever we talk about, we are only talking about symptoms. We're not dealing with root causes. And I think the ultimate social program of all is to shore up our education and to make sure that we educate people out of poverty. We educate them for jobs. We match the kind of jobs we are training them for with the kind of jobs we want. We educate people off of the welfare cycle. We educate, re-educate adults to go to work. We deal with adult illiteracy. There is not a problem you can address to me, and I challenge you to do this, that would not be made better by massive education effort. I don't care whether it's drugs or the deficit or what we do with nuclear waste. Every problem has an education component. Education is the hub of the wheel, and all other problems are spokes off that hub.
All right. Now, Mr. Searcy.
Thank you, Mr. Bart. As I have said to the top of my lungs and to the ones and twos as well as the hundreds that I've been able to attract in this discussion, is that economic development is the fundamental key and the fundamental basis through which we fund and regenerate the kinds of monies necessary to fuel the programs so needed in our economy. That's on the revenue side. But in addition to dealing with the revenue side, we must also understand that there's simply a lot of fat and waste in our budget. And on the appropriation side and the expenditure side that currently exists, cuts need to be made there, and we need to reorder and reprioritize our budget. There's no excuse for having research and development for military hardware at 38% increase over the 1982-86 period, and have an 82% decrease in R&D funding for housing, a 14% decrease for education. So if we do both, then we're going to get the solution that we need in the long term.
Mr. Clement.
Teddy, one is Social Security. I really want us to always preserve that. I don't want it tampered with. I know there are a lot of things being said about Social Security now, but I don't want that particular program involved with it all. We need to make sure that it remains solvent because it's just too important. And these people are in their golden years, and I hope to be there one of these days myself. Also, education. I don't know of any better, easier, cheaper way to move our society to a better station in life, to a better quality of life than through education, and I've been on the firing line there for the last 4.5 years. We're spending $800 million a day for our national defense, and I'm strong for national defense. I think that's one area we can trim, and I think there are many more.
Mr. Bredesen.
If I understood the question correctly, I think, Bob, that those people are going to get awfully hungry and tired of waiting before they're ready for Social Security. But just in 60 seconds, I mean, an area that I'd like to focus on is the whole area of jobs. I mean, at the root of the problem you describe are people who are unemployed or people who are underemployed. I think that's an area where I can bring something unique to the equation. Having been a businessman, I think I can do a good job of, in this district anyway, recruiting companies to come into the district. I think I can do a good job of getting business to existing companies in this district. I think I can do a good job of helping entrepreneurs who want to get their businesses going, as I'm doing at TSU right now at this Business Incubation Center. And I think having a decent, well-paying job is right at the heart of what it takes to be a part of American society, and I'd like to put my emphasis so far as I can in that direction.
All right. First of all, I would like to thank the members of the audience. We didn't get to everybody that has questions, but time prohibits a lot of that, and I wish we had. So I want to thank you, and I hope that you appreciated this aspect, this component of the League of Women Voters Forum, and we can continue to operate in this manner for a portion of future.